Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is episode 198. My name is Adil Ahmad, and I have misophonia. This week I'm talking to Klaus, an executive in Germany. He shares his experience with misophonia and how it has affected his career and personal life. We talk about growing up in an early family life that was very old-fashioned and rigid, and where he also had a brother who presented signs of possible OCD, and parents who just couldn't understand and were constantly trying to discipline. He discusses the challenges of working in open offices and how certain triggers can disrupt his focus and cause stress. Klaus also explores the idea that being in an active and engaging environment can help distract from misophonic triggers. He reflects on the role of rigidity in misophonia. And finally, we discuss the value of connecting with other misophones and forming communities for support. After the show, let me know what you think. You can reach out by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. By the way, please do head over and leave a quick review or rating wherever you listen to the show. It really helps to drive us up in the algorithms, which helps us reach more listeners. A few of my usual announcements. Thanks again for the incredible ongoing support of our Patreon supporters. If you feel like contributing, you can read all about the various levels at patreon.com/misophonia podcast. All right, let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Klaus. All right, well, Klaus, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be here. Big fan of your podcast.
Appreciate it. So, yeah, do you want to tell us kind of where you're located?
Yes, so I'm in southern Germany. I am now in my late 50s, so I have about 45 years of misophonic experience, if that is a thing.
Oh, yeah.
And yes, I work in a big international company, and well, it started a bit rough, but during a couple of years, I had a very good time there and was able to climb up a little bit the ladder. So I was lucky to get the rights for an own office, which is a big thing in a big company, because well, we all know how we can suffer in
open offices. Yeah.
Or not even function in open offices. So
right.
that's been a stream of luck I had. So I'm very grateful. But okay, in the end, right now, I struggle nevertheless with the dual stress of being in a rough job and while the misophonic things from time to time they really bring us to our edges and
right. Yeah, that's interesting. We can maybe talk about that a bit. Like if you've been elevated to kind of like upper higher on the ladder, you probably have to interact with a lot of people, probably a lot of other important people in the company, and have to make big decisions. Does it ever get to the point where you're in a big meeting or a boardroom and it's very stressful, and then you're just kind of taken out of the moment because of somebody's chewing something or making a weird sound?
Yeah. That is really something that was threatening to kill my career for a couple of times.
Wow.
But well, I think for myself, when I'm embedded in something that is active, where I contribute, where there's positive stress, then I feel a bit better and more protected from the misophonia than, for example, if I am having to work. I would not be a good software developer. I've been that 30 years ago. I would not be a good one because in this calm environment, the triggers would threaten me much more. Even light triggers like keyboard, and you know all this classical stuff. I'm in fact quite a classical case with all these things. In a meeting itself, well, thanks God, gums are not so accepted anymore. So that improved a lot in the last 10 years, I would say. Yeah, well, sometimes it's difficult, but I cope in a meeting by trying to bring forward my cases, be active, and that distracts me from the triggers. And in many cases, that helps a lot, and I can get along in meetings. It is harder if you're not the active part of a meeting. Then it gets much harder. When you have to listen, trainings, for example.
Oh God, yeah, I could not do those. Right. So I've been in those trainings. Yeah, you get to a big company and then suddenly you have to be trained, or you have to go to like those those leadership training things, and have to go into small groups, and then it's you have to worry about who you're with for the next 2 hours.
Yeah, of course. We all have this scanning. Where would I be rather safe? Yes, and do I have to go on the front row to not feel the others in the back, or do I have to sit in the last row? Yes, I'm doing all this, but my experience is when you're active, when you're distracted, when you're thrilled by the subject, I can cope better than if you have to be passive and listening. And
that's interesting. That brings up a theme that I've been thinking about, and I've mentioned on the podcast about how when you feel your authentic self and you bring that kind of your own energy, your own authentic spirit, I feel less vulnerable to misophonia. And that might have something to do with, when we were children, many of us were in environments where we were kind of scared of something or felt like we were not able to be ourselves. And in a stressful environment, I've noticed that correlates to a lot of the origins of misophonia, or that period in our lives. So I wonder if that has something to do with it. When I'm in a meeting, I'm kind of an entrepreneur too. When I'm in a meeting, when I'm coming up, brainstorming ideas and talking about things, I don't think about misophonia. But when I feel trapped and I'm having to listen, or somebody else is, saying stuff that I don't agree with, that's when I feel a bit more prone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This is then perhaps even helping. Well, I sometimes think you can even lower the trigger responses when you are you remember the Tom Dozier Doja methods of I read his book, and in some cases, in some areas, I think he has a point. We might be able to lower some trigger responses by being exposed in certain situations. I don't think the way he does it would help me, but what helps me is imagine I'm doing something that I really like. The best is not feel trapped at all. So, for example, gardening, where I can go where I want, where I'm in my whole body is in movement, and then. And I do something thrilling like planting new tomatoes. Okay, not everybody finds that thrilling, but I do. And in these situations, I sometimes notice some triggers that would bother me if I lay in my sunbed. They don't bother me anymore. And it is even I once had a trigger that was really, really hard for me to cope with. And with these kind of exposures, I managed to cope with it, and
Mm-hmm.
it went almost away then this way. So
Mm-hmm.
perhaps I don't know. I think here we can say it. No, the triggers. No.
Oh yeah,
So
you can mention trigger names.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So in this case, it was a bird chirping. Yeah. So I once had an experience as a child, well, as an adolescent, where I saved a bird who fell from his nest, and I tried to raise it, and it was
Mm-hmm.
a kind of a mockingbird, some European version of it, and it after a day or two, it really triggered me enormously, and I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't escape because the poor bird depended on me, and
Right.
so this way I developed a trigger of bird chirping. And
Interesting.
it was a real difficult time for a couple of years because birds are everywhere, at least in certain seasons. And then exposure to birds is when you do outdoor sports. So,
Right.
uh, and I came into liking mountain biking a lot. And in the beginning, there were some problematic days where I couldn't stand the birds, but then I got used to it a little bit during mountain biking, and I did it so often that one day I really lost my bird chirping trigger. But this was the only one I ever lost, honestly.
You lost
Well,
and it's still not a trigger for you.
it came back in a very
Oh,
stressful moment in my life,
gotcha.
but it was lost for a while. And this is, I think, uh, a, a way where we could perhaps develop some, I don't know, some coping or even therapy around that. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you need well, I need at least a good combination of something is really exciting for me. I'm
Yep.
distracted by that. Perhaps I'm not trapped at all physically, so I don't need to sit in a chair.
Right.
And then this combination of things, and then you feel healthy, you feel strong, and this combination can then help you to be in such a positive um, state that there's a deconditioning of the trigger slowly
Yeah.
with a lot of exposures. Unfortunately, you need a lot.
Right.
I hope this way one day somebody could could try to develop something that helps us. It's just so hard to create the good conditions.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think people have thought about because we know stress in general exacerbates misophonia, but yeah, it's interesting. Perhaps there could be some therapy that involves not just de-stressing and thinking about triggers, but also something that's very personal that excites. Being able to do something that's personal that excites us, not feel trapped, feel stressed, and then maybe introducing some of the triggers.
Mm.
That
Mm.
combination might be something that I haven't really heard about that as a therapy, but that I like that.
I
It's
think it is very hard to set up,
right.
especially for a therapist. For
Yeah,
a therapist, yeah, it's just
you can't just set up a
you
tomato
must.
garden in their office and and try to do it. But I think it's something that we should all be thinking about and try to find opportunities to do that in our homes. Consciously spend time on our passions and maybe you can listen out for sounds and see if we can kind of balance them.
I sometimes imagine it's like a tipping point when everything is perfect conditions. Then you could tip
Right.
towards the deconditioning, but of course it's unfortunately it's not really tipping; it's slowly moving. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
While unfortunately in the other direction, you have well, in your youth, you surely had some distress when you developed the trigger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the tipping point, unfortunately, is much faster in the negative direction.
Right.
And you condition the trigger. So, yeah, well, it's hard work to reverse it. So hard work that we rarely succeed to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It's funny. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I mean, maybe it's a bit of a cliche, but we have less time to think about and do these kinds of things. You know, it's like when I feel like, you know, these days, when does somebody have time to like consciously sit down and try to do some of these exercises? It gets harder and harder, and maybe that's why more and more people are, you know, stuck with misophonia. Do you want to go back to maybe kind of your? I'd love to hear kind of maybe your origin stories when you were an adolescent or even younger, and when you first kind of noticed misophonia.
yeah, the story how I developed misophonia is almost classic. I remember it very well. Um, so I grew up in a middle class family that was rigid, I would say, old fashioned. My parents were perhaps a bit stressed with building house and stuff, and I had two brothers, and in one of these years, I think I was 11 or 10, my elder brother, who's 1 year older, he developed a kind of OCD that showed, well, there were some things at the table that he did not, he was not able to tolerate. For example, if you let a bottle open on the table, a bottle of water, because we drank sparkling water. So he became aggressive when somebody didn't close it well.
Oh.
And he lost that, but and then the ambience was always destroyed because my parents were, well, overloaded with this kind of behavior. And so the ambience was always bad, and especially there was a lot of, well, my parents tried to discipline my brother. There was physical abuse, and then he developed misophonia against one trigger of the jaw sounds of my mother. So I remember myself, I sat there and I felt this is not a nice ambience. I want to get out of here. And I had some sympathy for my brother because I felt the whole ambience as being rigid and too strict. And then my brother, in fact, transferred his misophonia to me. The jaw sound of my mother also triggered me. Later, all eating sounds of my mother. And well, and then something interesting was my brother, my elder brother. He is a very extrovert guy, so he is always lashing out. And this did not always do him good things. So he was getting a lot of how do you say that in English? Yeah, when punishments,
Yeah.
and I sat there and I became more and more introvert, so I bottled it up. So then when we grew older, so this happened during 1, 2, 3 years. I don't remember that, but it was a repetitive thing every time we ate. So I hated going home to have dinner or lunch. It's been the same, but basically. So and my brother then moved out, or he came rarely home, and I was introvert. I tried to escape, and now I think a month ago or 2 months ago I asked my brother, and how did your misophonia develop? And he didn't know the word. And then I explained him, and he said, that it's not a problem for me anymore.
Hmm.
So, and it was quite severe at the dinner table. So I wonder whether it's not one of these good things when people lash out when they're extrovert instead of bottling it up. So my brother is really very extrovert. He's as soon as something is not according his will, he's ranting. He's well,
Yeah.
he would not have a good time in a big firm. He's working for himself. So he has a little company. So, but just working alone. But I really wonder, and that should be explored by science, in my opinion, whether extrovert people who don't bottle up the things, whether they in
Yeah.
the long term not cope better with misophonia than the introverts.
Yeah. That's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, well, that was my start of misophonia, and then it spread out to almost basically everything that is classic, um,
Yep.
until I then moved out of home, and as a student, I went into a small town where it was very cheap to study, and there I did try therapy, and in this,
Mm-hmm.
well, they didn't know at that time. I mean, we talk about the late 80s. Um, they
Yeah.
didn't know what therapy is, but nevertheless, perhaps it helped me to try to overcome. Well, I remember to overcome some parts of it, some parts that they lead to just always making it worse. For example, the shame and guilt. I think most of the introverts they feel that. Strangely, my brother didn't, but it makes things worse because then you have distress even because of your guilt.
Yeah.
So I developed, and I think today it's been a good thing. I developed a principle for myself. Each time there is something and I don't know how to address it, a trigger, and I don't know how to address it, which happens 10 times a day, at least once I'll address it and overcome my inhibitions to do so and my shame and guilt because I want to be able to do that. So I, during years, did that. Once a day, I overcome this inhibition, and over time, I got I got better, I think. And sometimes you can turn a bad situation into a good one. For example, by connecting to people. Sometimes the guy that is triggering you, in the end, is not such a bad guy at all as you imagine. You just
Right.
need to address it
Right.
correctly. He doesn't want to hurt you. Addressed the correct way, you can even be friends afterwards. It's
Right.
it's possible. So I tried that, and that helped me a lot. So I became less introvert. I had more activities among people, and in the end, I did get much better during the years that I studied. That's
And by addressing it, did you mean telling the person to stop making the sound,
well,
or?
it depends on the situation. For example, if somebody
Yeah.
at that time, the people that smoked had this cigarette lighter Zippo, I think you remember what
Yeah.
I'm talking about. Oh, that
Oh
awful
yeah. Yeah.
sound. I mean, yeah, the most
Yeah.
awful sound you
Yeah.
can
I
imagine.
forgot about that.
Yeah, so you
Yeah.
in this case, of course, you must address him and tell him, please, that sound, is uh,
Right.
is unbearable for me. But in some cases, it's
Right.
like people are loud and having a party, and then perhaps you find a way to sneak in and be part of that. Huh? So
Yeah.
or there's each and every situation must be must be analyzed, and perhaps there's opportunities. And this is what I gave myself as a homework every day once. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Hmm? Sometimes you make a fool out of
Right.
yourself. Yeah, but you have how can you overcome shame and guilt other
Yeah.
other than
You just
just
have to
face it?
put
Yeah,
your
yeah,
face it and then be proud of yourself
yes,
for that. That you did something.
yes.
Most people don't.
And sometimes it works
Um.
very well. People even apologize
Right.
and then ask you. Well, and you can connect to them then in a very friendly way. Sometimes it doesn't work, and people just say, "Mind your own business," and well,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
But yeah.
Interesting.
So
Yeah.
so this is what I thought saved me a little bit from this negative trend that I had before during my student years, and the trend went much better
Yeah.
until I was faced with the perspective to have to work in offices shared with others on computers.
Right.
That was
Yeah.
then again a hard time for me.
Right. And so this takes us again. Well, maybe going back a bit, like, what did your parents think as you were growing up about misophonia? I mean, it sounds like with your other brother, they were quite not happy about what he was going through. Did they notice that you were um, having reactions to their sounds?
Well, it was so severe that there was no way of hiding it. Yeah? So they sent
Mm,
me to doctors, a lot of doctors, which I also wanted to go because I wanted to know what's wrong with me. Yeah? At
hmm
that time, nobody knew what it is. Well, all the other guests of my generation, and they all said the same. At that time,
Yeah.
the reaction was
Right.
just get along with it, and yeah, it's annoying, but
Right.
this, yeah. Well, in the end, it was. What I remember is once I had an appointment with a doctor that knew my grandfather, and
hmm
he did say something like, "Oh, this is tragic. Something is transferred from grandfather to son. So it looks like
Mm.
my grandfather had it." But I don't remember my grandfather. He died before I was well 9 years old, so I really don't remember him very well.
Right.
But it looks like he had it also. So it runs a
Interesting.
little bit in my family, and what is also for me a parallel, there's a correlation. I think in my family there runs also a certain rigidity.
hmm hmm
So you once had a doctor on the podcast who does a kind of an exposure therapy. He doesn't have misophonia himself. I forgot his name.
Yeah.
He
I think you might be talking about Ezra Cowan.
Yes, I think
You
so.
might.
And he
Yeah.
developed a theory that it has to do with rigidity. And I when I read that, well, I wanted to read his paper, but I didn't find it on the
Mhm.
internet without paying some fees. So I just read the
Right.
abstract. But in the abstract, I was
Yeah.
stuck struck by his parallel to rigidity. And
hmm
perhaps he has a point there, in my opinion. And that's another thing we can work on. If there's a factor of rigidity, I mean, all this is just factors, and genetics is also a factor, but you cannot do much about that.
Right.
Not yet. Yeah.
Right.
but
Right. Yeah.
but I think during my student years, knowingly or not, I really worked on being as little rigid as possible. I rejected perfectionism in a lot of areas. I was chaotic and enjoyed being so. And I think all this helped because I mean it's a fact. It can be a factor. You are rigid. Things have to be this way. If not, you don't like them. And then things are not this way. It's a little factor to distress.
Right.
And you are a little bit closer to develop a trigger. So when you just like things the way they are, I mean, I'm talking about a stage way before you develop a trigger.
Right.
When you start with, oh, I don't like that, the way this is. So you're closer to a trigger. One step. I don't know how many steps you need to develop a trigger, but somebody talks too loud, and then he says nonsense, and I want to concentrate to something else. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really want this other thing now being my focus and nothing else. So you step by step you come closer to having the boundary conditions for a trigger, for developing a trigger. At least I function this way, and I cannot help it, but I try. And one of the things trying is I tried not to be rigid. I tried to not develop a vision how things should be. I do that. I do that naturally, but I feel be careful, because as soon as you are too rigid, you will be again in danger of the next trigger.
Right. You're vulnerable to right. You're vulnerable to something breaking your bubble.
I didn't know. I didn't think this way explicitly until I read this abstract of his paper. So from there on, I don't agree with the rest he said. By the way, it's a little bit funny to see when you see all these people you had that do therapy on your podcast, and those who don't have misophonia themselves. They sometimes can understand misophonia, but they are wrong with the treatments, in my opinion.
Not just your opinion, yeah.
There's even therapists. I mean, so I would next time I would seek a therapist who has misophonia himself. Didn't meet one yet. I think that perhaps somebody is listening. Then he should advertise it. I have misophonia. I'm not just talking about something theoretical. Come to me. If I cannot help you, nobody.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think that the people who advertise that they are providers, they should flag whether they have misophonia or not. Because I think a lot of people are trying to consider themselves therapists, just having learned about it, but it's not the same as experiencing it, because I feel like a lot of the research is still not really is definitely missing the mark, and it's a lot of the reason is because they're obviously, when you read these papers, they obviously don't understand really what misophonia is, even in 2024. So whenever I hear about a therapist, that's the first thing I wonder is, do they have misophonia or not, because that makes a huge difference.
Well, it's not
hopefully in the future it'll be a little bit more. It won't be that much of a dividing line, but at this point there seems to be quite a gap.
Yeah, you had a couple of young people who go into that direction with misophonia themselves. So the future will surely bring out a couple of bright minds that then hit the point a bit better.
Yeah. How about getting into, like, I don't know, friends and or family as an adult? Like, how did you deal with misophonia? Did you tell them what was going on socially?
Well, the in the past, in fact, I didn't tell them I have misophonia when I didn't know the word. Well, I think I learned about it 7 or 8 years ago. Before that, I had no ways to describe it except for I have this odd thing, and I didn't get any very positive experiences. So I did it to friends where I had to do it because I mean, if not, the triggers would be too much between us. But I try to avoid it as much as possible and try to cope with it and be weird sometimes. It's better than telling them what's going on.
Right. Right.
Well, even my wife had trouble yeah, well, of course she found out, so I had to arrange a little bit how we do eating together and yeah, well, but she had trouble to really understand it. And what is not ideal, huh? I mean, I think it's not ideal if somebody tries to protect you from the triggers by overdoing it. Yeah, but how can they not overdo it? How can they find the line between what is necessary and what is not? I mean, it's so hard for them. So it's better not to tell them. And I would recommend people who are friends with misophonia to not overdo it but be very quick to correct if something looks like it's triggering, but not overdoing, not anticipating it. I mean, it gets weird.
Not shining a big spotlight on it. Like, we don't want to think about it. And if we see that they're walking on eggshells, that just stresses us out even more. That's definitely something many people have said. So thanks for sharing that.
What my wife, for example, does well is when we go in a restaurant, she lets me choose the table. And she is patient because sometimes I go in one direction and then say, oh, no, I changed my mind. I go in the other direction, and then she is patient. Right. That is okay, but she should not go herself and find out where there could be a possible trigger, because I mean, how can she?
Right. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, do you have any other little things that you do with your wife to kind of like navigate it a little bit?
I'm very happy that my wife she loves eating, watching TV. So at home,
okay,
well, that is helping a lot. And well, then I need my safe place, so I have a room for myself, and it belongs to me. And there, I can be safe wherever I need to get out of the way of something. I think everybody should organize that. That's very helpful. Well, when you in preparation for this meeting, I thought about my coping skills. So So the first coping thing that I found is when I was 15, and it was really hard for me to sleep. And I found there's a German brand of earplugs that is called Oropax, and it has a funny story because they started it in the First World War for the soldiers, and this way the army bought them for their soldiers, and it's wax and soft. You once had an Italian lady that was also a big fan of soft wax earplugs, and these are the best, and they're still the same as 110 years ago. And For me, it was a game changer to be able to sleep because triggers. It's, in sleep, I'm very sensitive to triggers.
Yeah.
What I also discovered in my youth years, and it's still working fine, is valerian. I,
What's that?
it's a plant that is a little bit sedative, and
Okay.
it works very well for me. You have pills; you can buy them in the pharmacy probably. I am not so sure in how far they are not then. Well, in the United States, you have always brand names, and you don't talk about the ingredients.
Right.
You talk about the brand names. In Europe, you are more talking about the ingredients, the substances, and this helps.
Oh, so Valerian, Valerian.
I'm sure you
Yeah.
have. I'm
Okay.
sure you. It works
I'm just
super.
looking it up on
You
Wikipedia.
you
Yeah.
don't need a prescription. It works.
Mm-hmm.
You take one of the strong one, or at least I take one. Half an hour later, it takes off a big part of my anticipation anxiety and calms me
Mm-hmm.
down. It is like going from, well, a trigger then that would come goes down from 9 to 6, let's say, which is already a lot.
Yeah.
So each time I
Right.
have to face a hard situation like an exam or a test or something, I take that. It's not that sedative that you will not perform.
Or fall asleep. But
You will
yeah.
be excited enough. But this is really something simple, cheap, and can help you through some difficult situation where you know in advance you can't escape the triggers. It helped me a lot. Yeah. Well, and then.
Yeah, that's good. That just found that. Yeah. Valerian root. Mm-hmm.
Mm. I'll try it. I would love to have.
Yeah.
I didn't meet other misophonic people, but people with other anxieties. They have also. They also occasionally take that. Other coping skills are sometimes really be active and be doing yourself a lot of noise. I saw in one of your podcasts somebody said we tend to be afraid of doing noises ourselves because well, we know how it is being triggered by noises,
Right.
but isn't that a trap? Because other people perhaps might not be triggered at all, but we walk
Right.
on eggshells. We have
Right.
an elevated level of anxiety not to be triggered, but also not to make a lot of noise to trigger other people.
Right.
Shouldn't be
Right.
just.
It's
Yeah,
added stress that
yeah,
exacerbates our nervous system. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's well, of course, you have to do that in a cultivated way. But I think, for example, I had to travel a lot in airplanes, and in airplanes, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. You cannot escape,
Right.
yeah? And you have to behave. You
No.
cannot
Yeah.
lash out.
Right.
So
Yeah.
what can you do there if the ANC headset is not strong enough? I look forward to the next generations. I hope they can cancel 100% of the noises one day, but um, they're not yet there. So my coping skill in an airplane was always to try to come into a lively discussion with somebody.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So my
Yeah.
poor neighbors sometimes didn't escape, and I didn't know them, but I said, okay, no shame, no guilt, no. I just forced him to talk to me. Hmm?
Yeah.
I'm exaggerating a little bit when I describe it, but Sometimes they are super happy because they're bored or afraid themselves or whatever. But
Right.
it helped me a lot to cope through things because well, sometimes there's triggers of a certain intensity that that I can fade out when I'm really distracted. Yeah? And if I'm not distracted, they will build up in their intensity level without me being able to do anything except being distracted.
Right.
So my coping skills are trying to be active and engage in something.
Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah.
It's the same. It's the same. I mean, when the children of the neighbors making sound, you could try to play with them instead of instead
Right.
of just being triggered by their noises.
Judging. Yeah. Right. Instead of just kind of like in our heads, kind of like cursing at them and just spiraling out.
Yeah, it sometimes works, and then it's such a great thing when it works, but it doesn't always. I have to admit.
Right.
So that is one of the.
What about like? Oh yeah. Any other coping methods?
Yeah, well, in terms of meditation and yoga and mindfulness, you had a couple of people in the podcast who thought.
Yeah, definitely.
So what I did from my youth times on, when I started with the misophonia, I did autogenic training, which is a bit old-fashioned now. But have you heard about it? Autogenic training?
I don't think so. No.
I think it is something like PMR, progressive muscle relaxation, a technique. Well, developed in Germany, so it's a bit more popular in Germany. And yes, I did that. But honestly, I'm not. Well, it can help to calm you down, be a calm person if you're not triggered, like any other meditation technique. But it did never help me to really cancel triggers or dampen them directly. So I'm not totally convinced that for everybody mindfulness and these kinds of triggers, these kinds of things work against misophonia. It can help them to be calmer people, perhaps.
Yeah, I think what you do, going back to what you've said a couple of times here, it's not just being calm, but I think also engaging in something that you love, or just engaging in general. Getting your energy out there helps. Yeah, that's something I'm going to definitely be keeping in mind. What about like visual triggers? Do they accompany your misophonia?
Oh yeah. My visual triggers again. It's like many others. It's when people touch their face. So when this fashion for beards came back 10 years ago, the number of people who constantly touched their faces were tenfolding.
Right.
Yeah, that was So the gum disappeared, but this came. So
right.
And
right.
I mean, yesterday I had a funny coping mechanism in one of the online meetings in work. Somebody fidgeting too much and then also touching. Well, anyway, he triggered me visually, and I took a Post-it and put it on the screen on his face, and I thought this looks funny. So if somebody is then the whole setup rearranged. When somebody is presenting something, the tiles rearranging, you have to follow it with a
Right.
post-it, and I always put a post-it on the
Right.
guy. Yeah, it helped me. So you could, of course, try to find a way how to stop the video, but I didn't. So I put a post-it on my screen to not see the visual trigger.
That's
Yeah,
a good one. That's a good
but
one.
I mean,
Yeah.
it can really be a problem in a meeting also, visual triggers. So yes, that will be then a stressful meeting.
What about so at work? Have you told people that you have misophonia?
Yeah, no. Well,
Or no?
I thought about it a bit, and of course they see me acting weird sometimes, being stressed, being impatient. Yeah, so.
Right.
But I did choose not to say anything because when I'm in other in meetings with other managers where we decide about, I don't know, a new building, do we do individual offices or open space or that kind of decisions,
Right.
and I really feel how little understanding there is for us
Right.
or for our kind of people.
Right.
Huh? And
Right. Right.
when I well, sometimes you see some conflicts in an open space office, and as a manager, you need to interfere. You need to make sure the conflict is not escalating. And then you talk among managers about it, and I feel like there's zero understanding in my colleagues for this condition.
Mm-hmm.
So I did choose not to
Mm-hmm.
say anything. But the odd thing is, the 2 months ago, I went to the guy in our company that is responsible for helping handicapped people. So you have in every company you have one. I don't know
Yeah.
what's the correct term for it. You know what I mean. And I told him I'm saying you now something that I've never told anybody in my almost 30 years of work career. I have misophonia, and I would like to know what is possible in terms for that, in terms of
Right.
accommodation in this
Accommodating it.
company.
Yeah.
And then I asked him, "Do you know what misophonia is?" And he said, "Yes, I know it because I have it myself." So that was
Wow.
the first guy I ever met who
Has
who declared
misophonia.
that. Well,
Yeah.
well, my brother has it. I have
Right. Right.
a
Right.
couple of other people where I have the suspicion they have it, but somebody who really declared he has misophonia himself, it was the first guy. But anyway, despite all the understanding, he confirms what I feel. It's simply bad luck. There's no accommodations here,
Mm.
except for the quick wins, like being allowed to have a headset
Headphones.
and that kind of things.
Yeah.
So
Right. Right.
I mean,
Yeah. That's interesting.
it's hard. I think we might really think about the young people who study and who have misophonia, whether they should be coached in their career choices, because if big companies go more and more in this direction of open space,
Right.
unless people work a lot of time in home office, I think for a misophonic person, it is perhaps not the ideal career choice. So
Right. 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 Yeah. No. We. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Hopefully, I think the pendulum will swing back to from open offices and something a little bit more sane. I know that a lot of newer designs around here, especially, are, there's some open office, there's some rooms, there's some shared spaces. So I think it's good to have optionality. I mean, that
yeah,
makes the most sense, I think. But because yeah, I mean, I could take sitting at my desk in an open office for a little while, but if it starts to get too triggered, and I know I can move, I'm not going to be debilitated. So
Yeah, well, we are not all the same. This is also complicating things.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Mm.
Yes, I mean we're getting up to close to an hour. Anything, yeah, so this is super great. Any, I don't know, any other kind of like thoughts that you have about misophonia or share experiences that you want to share?
Well, there was something that I would like to ask you.
Yeah.
Once you mentioned it's well, I always thought it is a dangerous situation when a misophonic person or some well, I don't know how we call them is meeting others,
Yeah.
is hanging
Right.
out with others because perhaps
Right.
they will just well you know sometimes you can transfer a trigger from one person to another just by yeah by always talking about it, always
Yeah.
arranging things,
Right.
looking
Right.
out for it. So, but so I thought it is perhaps not a good idea to have friends with the same condition. But
Mm,
you said you have different experiences. You feel safe around them, and so
yeah. Right.
would you recommend that people form communities where they hang out with with others? So would that
Oh,
be
that's what misophonia?
yeah?
Yeah, I totally do. And there are some Zoom calls that go on which where people are all over the world are kind of like calling in to talk about misophonia and their experiences. But I think in person, it is valuable because when I've gone to the misophonia convention and I'm around a whole bunch of other misophones, there's like a default layer of understanding that we have for each other,
Mm,
and we're kind of looking out for each other. But also, I'm in most cases, not all the time, I'm less likely to get triggered by someone who I know understands misophonia. Do you know what I mean?
yes, I know.
And so I think getting together with other misophones, and when I do get together with other misophones in a coffee shop or whatever, they don't trigger me.
Hmm.
And so, and I also know if they did, I could say something and they'd immediately understand. But I think that's what I think there is something valuable to like meeting in person, even meeting as a group.
Yeah, no, yeah. When you said that last time in one of the podcasts, I think I said it changed my mind a little bit. Perhaps we should organize something like that. In Germany, there's not yet much.
Yeah, right.
We have a couple of Facebook groups, but I mean the ranting is the biggest part.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
and 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 I mean the rigidity also sometimes in the ranting
right,
you see how rigid people are, how
right,
much they think things should be this way, and they rant because it's not.
right,
No? It's not only the misophony poor things.
right, right.
But perhaps we should organize something like these groups and
Yeah,
ah,
I think every city should have one, and yeah, maybe that's something I try to help organize. But yeah, I think that's great. I hope people listening and who are in Germany will maybe connect and get something going.
I think I'll use one of these Facebook groups to ask a
Yeah,
question whether that exists in southern Germany. Would be interesting
right,
because I never met any um,
right.
except for the guy in the company, mm.
Yeah,
who was very nice, by the way. Um, so I would hang out
yeah,
with him.
yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. Um, well, that's great. Hopefully, yeah, hopefully this episode can kind of kick off a movement of in person hang. And summer's coming, so you don't have to be inside. You can be outside, and we can enjoy each other's company that way. Um,
Uh,
yeah, Klaus. I mean, thanks for coming on and sharing your story. Finally, yeah, it's great to finally connect after some rescheduling. But yeah, great to hear your story, and I know it's going to help a lot of people.
been fantastic to be here, and I hope you continue with this series of podcasts because I think it's really one of the very valuable elements of the whole misophony information out there in the internet. It reaches the right people, and
yeah, no, appreciate it.
I'm glad I discovered it, and I'm glad to be contributing.
Thank you again, Klaus. So great to hear from other parts of the world, and especially those who've had very successful careers living with misophonia. If you like this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to this podcast. You can hit me up by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or go to the website misophoniapodcast.com. It's even easier just to send a message on Instagram at Misophonia Podcast, follow there, or Facebook, and on X or Twitter it's Misophonia Show. Support the show by visiting the Patreon at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. Theme music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.